And my name is Amy Trendler. I'm the architecture librarian here at Ball State University, and Brad Johnston, the materials librarian, is going to be assisting today with the Zoom buttons and all that while we're running the talk. So we have three CAP authors that are joining us today to talk about their book projects. And the format is going to be, we're going to have like a short introduction to their books, and then we will go through some discussion questions. We got together and we talked about it. We came up with our plan. We may have time for questions at the end, so do be thinking about them. And if we get a chance, we'll open it up to questions, but we might be having such a wonderful discussion that we run out of time for questions. So like, don't get too set on that. I do have a slide to throw up at the end that has all of our contact information. So if you are thinking of a question or something that you'd like to talk to one of us about after the talk, you'll have that opportunity as well. So let me move my screens around and pull up my introductory PowerPoint, which is, again, it's very short, so that's not going to be the whole show by any means. All right, I've almost got my screens figured out. I have these two gigantic monitors, and so in cases like this, it's a lot of arranging. All right. Do we
can see it, yes.
Okay, perfect. So as I said, we are gonna do just short introductions, and for that, I asked each of our faculty authors to tell us the origin story for their book, and we'll take it in alphabetical order by author last names. And then while they are giving us that origin story, I do also have on the screen their bios, which I pulled from their books. So if there's anything that's not correct on here, something to think about updating for your next book project. So Chris, do you want to take it away?
Sure. Thank you, Amy and Brad. Thank you, everyone, for attending lunch. Is a busy time of year. So I'm Christopher Baas, a Ball State alum, and with sort of further training in historic preservation and cultural landscapes. About 20 years of practice as a landscape architect, and I've been teaching at Ball State since 2008. The origin story is that I've sort of been trained more like a cultural geographer. And so I got fascinated with vernacular barns and buildings, and was studying a very specific barn type down in Southeast Indiana. Someone said, hey, you should talk to Darren Rubino, who's my co-author. He can date buildings using tree rings. And I foolishly said, I'll collect the samples for you. And he's like, no, you don't know how this works. So that was about 2010. So Darren is a forest ecologist who teaches botany at Hanover College down on the Ohio River. And I didn't know anything about tree rings, and he didn't know anything about English barns and hay-press barns and eye houses and those types of vernacular architectural forms. And we just kind of hit it off. And then we've been probably have dated about 200 structures over the past 10, 12 years. About 2017, we had put in, we wanted to sort of do what was called a 50-50, which is 50 pages of text and 50 pages of images. That got rejected. We decided to go to Rutledge. I know that Sean's at Rutledge as well. And we wrote this book, Dating Buildings and Landscapes with Tree Ring Analysis. And you'll see that it's in the library, that it's sort of half science and half sort of case studies and application. And we've been able to date historic buildings and landscapes all over the state. So thank you.
All right, Thank you, Chris.
Mhm.
And alphabetically, our next author is Sean Burns. So, Sean, do you want to tell us your origin story for your book?
Sure. So I was a co-editor with Matthew Wilson, also here from Ball State. And it's really started from a paper that we presented at a conference. Architecture, Media, Politics Society was the name of the conference, and it was well received. And we had written a brief paper for it, and it was about site. And really, it came through the time of COVID, where Matthew and I have this shared interest in site and how to involve site and become this driving force rather than something that architects might react to. And so we did this brief paper. We didn't even really written the paper yet. We just gave a presentation, and it was really well received. And the director of the conference approached us and just asked if we'd be interested in expanding it for a possible chapter, and then which we were for like maybe a book at Routledge. And then Routledge seemed to be impressed by it, and they wanted to see if we could include it in one of their this Routledge Focus series that they have. So we wound up actually, it's interesting because a lot of times you have your co-author. So we have a let me back up and say we have a chapter in this book, but we also edited the book with four other chapters. Some of them are multiple authors, but we really didn't know them beforehand. We just kind of reached out to them because they were associated with the conference too, and they were interested in what we had to say. So we actually got to know people. We didn't really know the co-authors we were going to have in this book, and it really just came from this conference, and it really kind of happened fast, which is not a thing that happens with books. So we were pretty grateful for that, but it really it also came from the pandemic where we really were starting to question site, and I think it spiraled to a place in a good place that we didn't know was going to go, and so we're pretty proud that it came out the way it did, and maybe just the timing of it helped along. So that's kind of the origins of what we had.
All right. Thank you, Sean. And our last author is James. And James actually had two books come out recently. So he may talk about the more recent one more than the early or the well, I don't want to say older because it's barely a year old. But tell us the origin story of one or both of them.
Yeah, thanks. They're really tied together. So what happened was, first and foremost, the people that I'm working with these projects are, they're colleagues, they're working partners, and more importantly, they're very dear friends. And so Ebrahim Pustinci, who co-edited the Purple Architecture book, he and I have been working partners on design build projects, submissions, and he actually put me in touch with Vahid Vadat, and that was because he knew that Vahid and I had a similar interest in architecture and film. And from that introduction, Vahid and I we co-chaired the 2021 Architecture and Film Symposium here at Ball State, which was a symposium that Vahid had already started himself prior. So I kind of got brought into that fold. And after we did the symposium, we were having discussions about, why don't we translate all this energy into a book? And that's where the architecture, film, and the in-between, the spatial cinematic betwixt book came from. And then as we were working on that book between Vahid and I, we started having additional conversations about these side conversations that were happening as we were working on the book, and from different submissions that were coming in and contributors that we're talking to. And of course, it really was from Vahid because he has a stellar background in bookmaking and book production. He has another one coming out, I'm going to plug, Animated Architecture, which he's graciously allowed me to be in. And so basically it said, well, hey, why don't we bring Ebrahim in, and why don't we explore this tangent conversation? And that's where A Purple Architecture came from. So these two books really spawned from friends who have common interests, who work on projects together. and that made a huge difference. But yeah, that's where they came from. And then, of course, we have a couple of events coming up in the near future, so it's more excuses that we don't need, but to get together and share the content. But it came from shared interests.
All right, and I will go ahead and stop sharing now. So thank you for sharing those stories. And one of the things that struck me as we were pulling the talk together, that in each case there were these collaborations, and you already spoke a little bit to that and how it was part of the beginnings of the book. But can you talk a little bit more to how that worked throughout the process? And by that, I mean both or either, like philosophically or practically. Were you meeting every week? Were you, setting deadlines for yourselves? Philosophically, did you like divide it up into two and like you take this half and I'll take this half, or were you working together, throughout the process? So if you want to speak to that question. And as we talked about in our planning meeting, we're not going to keep going alphabetically. So if someone wants to get started, and then I'm not expecting our speakers to respond to all of the questions during the panel. So we'll just start with our discussion. So Sean, it looks like you might want to weigh in on this.
Oh, yeah, it was interesting that the process for Matthew and I was in order to write the book proposal, we had to give a sample chapter. So in a sense, our chapter came first. So we collaborated to write that, and that became the sample chapter. So that was sent out as we had the other authors on board, and they were starting to write theirs. Now, when we got to the editing part of it, it was a lot of late nights, I think, with Matthew on Zoom. We were constantly sharing the documents and going through word by word and trying to edit all the different stuff. And then we had also, at the same time, we were writing the conclusion and the forward. So I'd just say it was a lot of time that we were just collaborating together on the computer. That was kind of how we did. But the chapter did come first, and that was maybe more in person than we'd meet together and just sort of brainstorm, which I think was and maybe this is unrelated to the question you have, Amy, but I think that was a unique opportunity for us to look at how both of our work related to in question site, and I think that helped us with that book proposal, those discussions at the beginning, to where we really sat there and said, maybe site's not just physical ground, and it's something else. So that kind of went through that.
Ours was kind of similar. I mean, in both scenarios, we devised the prospectus first, and then we started to identify a series of contributors that we thought would best obviously help complement the thematic content of the book. And we would do the same thing. Vahid is a professor out in Washington State University, and Ibrahim is a professor at Kent State University. So we would meet through Zoom, and we would do so. We would have weekly meetings. I think it was every Tuesday, but we would find a time for about an hour every week. And we did that throughout the summer and throughout the semesters. Once we, once we had formulated the conceptual framework behind the book and had the prospectus, and, once we started to get a better committed list, then we started to reach out for publishers. And with the in-between book, in all the scenarios, I think in most of the scenarios, it was certainly in the in-between book, the film book, it's more of a collection of theoretical papers and discussions of architecture and film. So we were looking for more of an academic press, which is how we found, or how we came across with Intellect Publishing out in London. With the Purple Book, that one is very different in the sense that we really were trying to challenge what a book was and what bookness is and how you experience a book. And so the book is structured in a way that it's a choose your own adventure. And it also has these augmented reality filters. And all of the graphic design and augmented reality filters were designed by Ibrahim. But we saw that also as an opportunity to think about things. So in that book in particular, we definitely needed to have these weekly meetings because there were these design components. It was a design project, and we saw the book as an object itself as well. So that kind of framed a lot of the ways that we were going about how we were going to do the projects and who we were going to talk to, and eventually who we would decide on in terms of a publisher.
Um, so we have, again, all of these buildings that we've sampled. And through our collaboration starts, so we collect data, so in the field. So it starts at the site, and usually like a full on day per building easily. And we collect as many samples. This is an example of a sample of tulip from a log building in southeast Indiana. 15, 20 samples. Darren takes those back to Hanover and runs them through the lab. And then I'll typically would start the sort of looking through the archival material sources to help explain what we think we see. And the lab time takes a lot, so I usually start writing. So this is how we were publishing articles, and it's kind of how we also approached the book. Sort of the science, the hard science, and the lab work is coming from Darren. The graphic, a lot of the writing, then it's coming from me. So that was sort of the balance that we struck. And then he looks at mine and I look at his, and we, as the other two are saying, you kind of meet and you go line by line and you work it out, and it comes together. So.
All right. Well, thank you. I like how, I mean, the collaboration, it was just so much more woven throughout the process, like all these different aspects, and that it wasn't a kind of cut and dried, like, well, I'll do these 150 pages and you're in charge of these 100. Like, I mean, I don't even know if that's, possible really with these kinds of projects, because the whole project, there's so much to it. So another theme that is woven throughout is the role that research plays. And here I'm talking about it like very expansively. So be as expansive as you want to be in your replies. So everything from the sort of traditional research, or the kind that Chris is describing, where they're out in the field, collecting samples, analyzing them. You're here in the library or offsite using our e-resources, like putting together bibliographies and like tracking citations and that kind of thing. But beyond that, research can also be, James, you already spoke a little bit about choosing a publisher. So finding a publisher for your work that matches the kind of, the things that you're looking to achieve. Finding contributors, or, someone that's going to write the foreword if you have a foreword. And I'm sure there's other ways too, but just research in all different ways. So does anyone want to jump in on that one?
Okay. Maybe because you just mentioned it with the contributors. And I do want to kind of make a special note today. One of the contributors for the Purple Architecture book was Janice Shimizu, who was a dear friend who we know we have lost. And so Ibrahim and Vahid and I have discussed, it's very small, but the Purple Architecture book and all the events that kind of move forward will be always dedicated in her name. But to speak to that too, I mean, there was a very specific reason why we reached out to Janice. And the Purple book, by the way, you can get it for free as a PDF as well as buy it. And the reason why I say that is because I would like you to all to read just at least what Janice wrote, which lined up a lot with a lot of the research that she did in terms of even her gaps class. And the title of her chapter was Mind the Gaps, and she was discussing these kind of in-between relationships. So a very big part of Janice is there. with that being said, the book in that particular case, as you said, like the research behind it, who to invite, that was a big component of, who do we think both can show some diversity, and expressive diversity of also thought, who might also be somewhat within maybe somewhat the canon of some of these discussions, but not always looking for the same, consistent voices, and maybe looking for opposing voices and stuff. So that was part of it. Hence the same thing in the forwards. So Mark Foster Gage wrote the forward for the film book, and Graham Harmon wrote the forward for the purple book. And again, these were because they had certain kind of philosophical and theoretical catalogs and libraries of their own work. And then the last thing, just in terms of the research of the publisher, for the purple book, what was even more, that was very important, because again, we wanted to kind of explore this choose your own adventure format. We wanted to have more autonomy over the graphic design. And again, as I said, Ibrahim was the one who took on the full brunt of that because of his expertise and background. So that played a huge role. And then the other thing was, and we had kind of talked about this offline at one point, was, we did talk to some of the bigger name publishers, and one in particular that, is very well known for architecture and research design type books, but the cost requested in order to produce the book was very, very high. And even within that, some of the autonomy for some of the things were not there. So again, like with the purple book being kind of a design project in of itself, and how it was going to be presented and the experience we were looking for, we had to research that component, but also couple that with the research of a publisher and working partners that could help us achieve that goal as well.
I would say that the research we had was kind of built out of studio a little bit. Like I said, it happened right after COVID. So some of that spurred some of the ideas of how we couldn't visit site during COVID, right? When we had a project. That's how Matthew and I sort of brainstormed about this chapter, or this actual paper that turned into a chapter. Authors wise, what I found interesting about our project was that not everybody was an architect. So I think it became what site meant then. They were all in the design fields, but it was, how does an interior designer think of site or something like that? Or, and I think that became interesting to us as we did the editing process, and we were going through and talking with these authors. We got to learn more about like the way, and they learned from us, and they really wanted to know about architecture. And so there's a collaboration there that probably, I think all the research you do should, build on itself and should expand your own knowledge of what you're interested in. So I think that gave us a chance to do that in an unexpected way, where it wasn't just us researching how we wrote the foreword or the conclusion or a chapter or even put together the book, but it became something that we learned from the others. And then we took that information, and Matthew and I would sort of find a way to even sequence the book so that it went from something maybe more conventional how you thought of site to something not like Matthew's chapter. Part of our chapter that he wrote was looking at short story as site, and part of what I wrote was about looking at something that was vertical atmosphere as site. So it wasn't just physical ground. And I think even the other authors reading that helped them push their papers along too. So it was a collaborative process throughout, in ways that were unexpected, I'd say.
I'd say our book is probably more traditional and more traditional research, where we have theoretical frameworks for interpreting the results of our field work. In our introduction, we discuss someone coming from the humanities background, and Darren coming from the hard science background, and how what we bring supports each other, and sort of interpreting the landscapes that we were documenting. So probably, since this is a library discussion, we use the library a lot.
Oh,
so
good.
sources. And but I'll also say what's sort of interesting about vernacular buildings is, you know, someone built this place and or vernacular landscape, someone built this place and may not, you know, they just lived their life and probably great people and got on with it, and they've sort of been lost to history. That maybe you might be able to find them in the census data. So it's sort of interesting to like uh, we've done lots of stuff down in Madison or in New Harmony, and we kind of know those people and know their history. But you know, you might just have this amazing barn in the middle of nowhere that if this family is, you know, on a map perhaps, or might be in the census data, and that's all there is out there. So and you know, so they get a shout out 2 centuries later from some landscape architect Yahoo at Ball State. So yeah, so be careful what you're doing today, because someone might circle around and get it. But now the things being digitized and available through Google Books, for instance, that aren't on campus. The census data, the agricultural census data is now available online. Ball State, I give them a shout out when we needed articles that we couldn't get online, the on loan, or we'll track the journal article down for you. It like you could ask for it in the morning and it would be there in the afternoon, and it was very supportive. So I see someone just did a heart, so that's cool.
Yes, interlibrary loan. They're very popular here on campus. I see nodding. Yeah. Well, and I like how, you know, the responses they did really incorporate all these things from, you know, as you said, like what we tend to think of as more like traditional library research. But actually, like research, it's so expansive and it touches on so many different things. And the other thing is, you know, the way you talked about it being part of the whole process. Like it's not something that happened in the beginning and then, you know, we finished that and moved on to everything else. You know, it played a part throughout the process in different ways. Um, and yeah, thank you again for the shout out for interlibrary loan. We'll make sure that they hear that. um, so before we go too much further, I wanted to make sure that we take a minute to talk about the writing. And so this is something that came up in our pre-planning meeting, and Brad actually contributed that we should be sure to ask a question about this, because I think in a lot of ways, maybe it's the same for you. We kind of forget about the writing because there's so much else involved in the process. And then your book's published and we put it on the shelf, and so I'd like to spend some time on writing, and whether that's, you know, questions like finding the time to do it, um, the collaborations that happen that way. And you spoke a little bit. So for example, Sean, you were talking about how you had already written the paper that sort of headed this way, you know, maybe thinking there about like or were there any changes along the way to what was written, you know, for one purpose? And Chris, you'd mentioned too, you'd been writing articles, like were you able to sort of take those and plug them in, or did that require, you know, some reworking too? And then James, I think your projects especially, there were so many contributors. It must have been challenging to be managing all that. And then you and your co-editors, like finding the time to write your parts as well. So I think there's lots to talk about here, but does anyone want to jump in?
Sure, I can jump in. So the writing, I think, was I mean, part of the biggest thing we did, right? That was for the book. Obviously makes sense. Um, so the paper we had really wasn't even in a physical form. It was more just a presentation when we had it. And it just became sort of a paper that became a chapter that became the basis for a book, which was sort of that, like I mentioned earlier, it was sort of evolved into something we didn't see it going to. But you know, and Matthew Wilson's a very gifted writer too, and you know, I just think he made book that much better just by his ability to write and research also. So I really was fortunate to be able to collaborate with him, and it was enjoyable to do that. But the writing does take a lot of time. I think it's something you really have to plan a lot for, and it doesn't probably come natural to me, but I think even working with Matthew, it just makes it it made it that much easier, that much better, and helped me grow and learn as a writer even that way. So yeah.
Can jump in here. I was fortunate enough to have a leave or a special project. So I had from January to August um, to write. And I think we did follow, we were still doing field work and lab work for some of the stuff in the book. But somehow I wanted to make a point here, if and maybe the other two might reflect on it. We like ran in the sand just in one spot for a long time. And we had been through, we had gotten accepted the contract and now we're doing it. And I think the sort of the first versions of things were a very sort of technical, scientific, like the journal articles, textbookish kind of thing. And then I don't know whose idea it was, or if it just happened at the same time. We kind of spun it around, and instead of being this sort of neutral third person voice, we went to first person. So if you look at the book, it's like um, we found this, and so that we can sort of like tell a story rather than like personal story wrapped up in these things, rather than making them this sort of neutral, just facts kind of story. So I'm assuming folks might be listening into this because they might want to write a book. I think it's just finding what the best voice is for you, and then but that seemed like as soon as we hit that, it just went, and it was very comfortable. So
I think in my case, so Vahid is a fantastic writer. I struggle with writing. I always have as a kid, and which is funny having these books and saying, writing is not really my forte. But I think one of the things that assisted and kind of what Chris is talking about when you would hit those moments is, for me, one is the fact that I was in both books, I was writing on content that I just have a general interest in, and that helps. So on the film book, okay, I'm stuck. I'm going to go watch a movie, and in particular, I have a affinity for horror and science fiction, and interested in poche spaces and these in-between spaces, which, as I start to talk about that, it makes a little bit of sense of why we're talking about the betwixt and between and the film book a bit. And with that as well, I mean, my challenge was, writing a 3,000 word conference paper sometimes can take me quite a while. And now we're talking about a 5,000 to 7,000 word chapter. I am the luckiest person in the world because my wife, and not because my wife helps me copy edit, but because she's my wife. But she's in an allied discipline as an artist, as a craftsman, as a craftsperson. And so one of the things that helped me a little bit in terms of like thinking about the audience who is going to be reading this is she understands what I'm doing, but if I start getting into the archespeak, if I start getting into these topics and I'm not really expanding upon things, or if I'm making references that really need to dig deeper, which then lies back into, I need to go back to the library, I got to go to the archives, I got to research things. That helped a lot, and all she would do, I mean, in a lot of ways too, God bless her, but she would just ask questions. And so that facilitated my writing moving forward, that I had questions in some ways to answer, and it started to kind of evolve. On the Purple book, it was a completely different challenge, as you mentioned, Amy's, because that book was comprised of about 30 contributors, and whereas the film book was about 13 to 15. And the challenge in the Purple book was it was almost the way that Vahid kind of talked about it too, in particular, was that we kind of approached it kind of like a conference proceedings. So we would we basically had 3 books in one, this Choose Your Own Adventure. And then the idea behind that was there were a series of projects, and then we would invite someone to write about the projects under this thematic heading. As I mentioned, Janice before, Janice's text was her writing a chapter reflecting upon the projects that were contributed. So the projects, they were significantly, shorter texts of about 1,500 words. The chapters, essays were about 3,000 words. And then in that case, our role as editors was kind of filling in the minutia in a way and kind of organizing the book, writing the perspective, writing what is a Choose Your Own Adventure, and kind of describing the thematic content in that way. So, so that one in terms of the writing was, I don't want to say necessarily easier, but the challenge of juggling those many submissions and deadlines and making, and getting work that's just going to be handed off to someone else who needs to write about it, and then copy editing. So, we were lucky in the film book, Intellect copy edited the book predominantly for us. I mean, obviously Vahid and I copy edited, but for the Purple book, we hired a copy editor with a small grant we got from Ball State. And one thing with the Purple book, we didn't index it. We did index the film book. And so I took on that task, which I think with my OCD, actually, I kind of enjoyed a bit. But I also had such a familiarity with all of the contributors' text that it was maybe a little bit easier for me to index because I knew. And I think at the same time, too, that also helped with the writing process a little bit is, looking at as Chris was saying, like, how did the other contributors write? Which was a big challenge of how to organize and piece the books together based off of the writing styles of the contributors as well, let alone, keeping on topic in terms of the conceptual topic of the book.
I just wanted to follow James. He probably saw me smiling when he was talking about his wife. My wife's a journalist too. So by trade, that's what she was trained in. And a lot of times I would read something to her and she's like, I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about right now. Like, so there's a lot of that, like you have to dial it back, like using words like, saying that, the site is a malleable substance. She'd say like, I have no idea what you're trying to say right there. So there's a lot of the ARCA speak that I could relate to totally. That's why I found that sort of very relative.
Always good to have in-house critics to kind of keep you keep you heading in the right direction. Well, so I had a couple more questions, maybe just real quick. The publishing process. Was there anything that kind of surprised you about it, or anything that you're like, I bet people don't know this about the publishing process? For example, like it's not lucrative. You're not, you're not coming into work on your helicopters now that you're published authors. But are there other things that you learned during the process that you just, didn't realize were going to be part of it?
The cost.
Yeah.
Like I said, we talked to, and it's a trade-off, right? So we're talking to these academic publishers. The cost to us was very low. And what I mean by that is, I can get a $2,000 grant from Ball State and I can cover, say like in the film book, we can cover the kind of photos we wanted. So we can move to a certain kind of printing rather than having color inserts or something. On the Purple book, it was actually the same thing. The only grant that I needed was, again, the publishing grant that Ball State offers, and I was able to use that to pay the copy editor. And so in both of those scenarios, we didn't have to pay a significant amount. In the first one with the film book, the caveat to that, of course, is that once it's published and it has a limited number of runs, I think the first run was like 500 copies. Now the book costs $150. So that's a huge problem. And we did talk a lot though, and Vahid was a big part of this of, well, let's get more funding so that we can see if we can get it to soft cover and open access faster. Now, granted, the soft cover version of that book is going to come out in September, and it's like a third of the price. Again, with the Purple book, we were more interested in access. So the fact that you can get a free PDF, and that PDF has these hyperlinks that allows you to really enjoy and kind of engage the Choose Your Own Adventure. But then the physical copy, I feel, allows you to explore the AR components, the augmented reality components in different ways, because the book really becomes a trigger for that in different things. But as I said, like, you know, when we were pursuing that book, and I have colleagues outside, and I know there's colleagues here who have done, you know, have published and, you know, and the publisher wants 20, 30, $40,000 for the book. Now, granted, they're then going to be able to do whatever you want, and then, you know, you might be selling it for 30 or $40. But, you know, the publisher that we were very interested in going with, you know, wanted $22,000, and it just, you know, there's just no way. And we applied to the Grant Foundation. Even on the film book, we applied to the Grant Foundation and we made it past the first round. But still, you know, it's so competitive. We explored the NEH and explored a variety of other kinds of grants and grants that you know, non-for-profits can apply for. So Ball State would apply for the grants on our behalf. But I think that part of the publishing process, and that again, for Purple, that's why we went with Carnegie Mellon, is because of the complete and full autonomy over the design part, which was huge. And as you said, I mean, you know, the royalties you get back. You know, I think I got my first. Well, I didn't even get technically my first check from Intellect because it, you know, it was so low, so low that it was just gonna, you know, I think it has to hit 50 pounds or something like that before we would actually get maybe a check. So maybe in like 2 or 3 years I'll get a check for 50 pounds maybe. But I would, just on the side note, that I would mention though too, in terms of the contributors, I mean, that was one of the things that rightfully was an issue for some of the contributors, that, as you said, it takes a lot of time to work on this, and we spent a significant amount of time during the summer, you know, writing and putting these things together. And for obvious reasons, some contributors, you know, for them to take the time would be looking for some kind of an honorarium. And, you know, unfortunately, we're not in a position to do that because we had to raise funds just to get the book published. So I think that component of the publishing, and I learned a lot from Vahid from that, but I think that part and the different conversations, because we talked to so many publishers. So their review process, the book submission, the proposal process, Intellects was unbelievably exhaustive and thorough. And others, and we would just use that one, you know, for the other books, and they were like, wow, you're giving us 100 times more information than we really need. So all those little things kind of played into, it was a very new experience from that end.
I'd say one of the things I learned, unfortunately, we didn't have the cost associated with ours, but that might be because, you know, we were part of a series and stuff like that. But there was the naming, I think, I don't know, James, this leads into what James was saying, because he said the autonomy. We had this thing, because we're part of the series, that we gave him a title for our book. It was called Surrogate Sites and everything. And they were like, no, you're not doing that. They wanted to make it very Google searchable. So it became Understanding Site and Design Pedagogy. So it was taken to this thing that we put a lot of time in crafting this title, and it was like, no, that's not going to be what we're doing. So that was kind of a bummer in a way, but I kind of understand it from their end, where they're trying to, you know, push the book and make it searchable and things like that. The review process I learned a lot from. I mean, I had never been associated with the book, but like having it peer reviewed from other people you send out to, and you actually give them, I don't know if you guys had this, but we gave them names of people, and then they give their own names. So that's sort of split, sort of 50-50. And I remember getting a call from Simon Boussier, who used to work here at Ball State. And he's like, dude, I just reviewed your book. And I was like, oh, okay, that's good. So I was, you know, but then he also sold himself out, because if he gave a bad review, I'd know it was him. But it was a process that I didn't, you know, I just got to learn a lot from. And Matthew's been through it before, so he also was kind of guiding me and be like, this is what's going to happen next and whatever. But I'd say the naming thing kind of surprised me, that we really were sort of given, they sort of chose the name for us before we even picked the name, I guess. And there was not really much negotiation there. We had a little bit of like going back and forth, but they really wanted it to be something very basic that people would recognize.
No, I don't have a lot more to add. I think you guys,
Well, I was going to say, then we might have time for the very last question. So like kind of our grand finale question, which I'm asking like in a completely genuine way, which is why a book? So it's a long process. There's a lot involved. And I really appreciate, James, you talking more about the business side of it. And like, I think you all got to experience that it is a business and there are, there's a lot more to it. And there's plenty of ways to sort of publish these days. You can self-publish, you can post things online, you can just stick to articles. So why a book? Why do it?
I
can
think,
start.
oh, sorry, Chris, go ahead. No, you didn't. I want to let you go first.
Uh, I wrote a list of why a book. Uh, um, I think initially, well, lots of reasons, and I'll tell you the selfish reason. We were publishing one side at a time, and each one required a description of the methods. And we were like, well, if we had it in one spot, we could just cite our book, which would explain what we're doing, and we could get on with what we had learned. So there was this sort of citation thing here. We also had lots of stuff, and we kept going back to the same journals, and I think we're probably wearing them out. So that gave us a chance to put a lot of our stuff out there, and we're proud of that. And the selfish, not selfish. It was sort of like, can I write a book? Right. It was like, it was a test. It was could I do it? So those were the reasons. So
Apparently you could. So
yes. I don't know if there's
uh,
another one in there or not, but yeah, one is there. So
Yeah, I was gonna, what Chris is saying, I think it was a challenge. I just wanted to sort of see if I guess when I was younger or in school, even an architecture student, I didn't think that would be where I'm winding up, or actually write a book, or I edited a book, but write a chapter for it. And it's sort of I guess the book part, the physical thing is that you have something that is like tangible, right? That you have this thing that you did, and it sort of reflects on what you were about at a point in time. And so I think sometimes if it's just online, you kind of lose that or something. But to me, I don't know. In my mind, I'm thinking like, okay, and the book's not gonna last forever. But I mean, to me, it is. It's like in that forever thing, and I'm going to keep that in my mind as a forever. So it's just something I can put on a shelf and just sort of feel. It's an accomplishment, right? That you feel that you've done something that it's a lot of work, and it was rewarding for me.
Yeah, I think, I mean, when we're in the office, our outputs are something that's built, something that's tangible, something that is a translation of our discipline and our ideas. And I think as academics, sometimes we can still do that. And other times it's how do we disseminate the things that we spend a lot of time on, right? Sometimes, like in my case, and I'm sure it's the same for Chris and Sean, like, some of these are also topics that are ingrained in our teaching and, discussions with our students and things. And so, but my former mentor here, Wes Jans, would also say, I mean, on the professional side of things, right? He would say, like, one way to think about academia and tenure tracks and tenure lines and things is, as an assistant professor, you're trying to get recognized in a way for your work. And as an associate and full professor, you're trying to have influence within your field and discipline. And I think the book is also a way of carrying that on. I think it's also, like I said, in these two books that I worked on, they're edited collections. So it also is a way of networking and engaging with people that I admire, or that I want to potentially have working relationships with. And to be perfectly honest, too, some of it was kind of, I didn't have to advocate very hard, but I advocated for some people who I thought deserved a platform that maybe I didn't get a shot or a chance to get involved with as well. And again, like people that I admired and said, oh, we really need to show that there's, similarities and some contrasting here with the work. So I think that was, I think, and what Chris and Sean said too, I mean, it also kind of felt like this unobtainable object. And I think one of the things I learned from going through the process is, especially in the edited collections, it kind of demystified the process a little bit, because we were reaching out to people that I was like, there's no way that person's going to respond to us. And you're like, wow, they responded, even if they said, no, I can't do it. And, or they would respond and say, yes, we can do it. So, oh my gosh, that's really great, because we think it would be useful, and very helpful as a complementary component. It's great that they want to, contribute. So I always, part of my mind would also kind of lead itself to the questions like, why do they say yes? So why a book, but like, why are they, these are people who have their own books. Like, why are they contributing? So I think it's a combination of those. And I think, again, like the book I'm working on now is going to be my own, my own book now. And because again, like the edited collections and the contributors is that's a lot of juggling. So and the same thing that Sean said, it was funny about the book titles, because we ran into the same thing, and especially with Purple, but eventually, again, like that also lent itself to the publishers. Like, this is the name of the book. Like, it's important. Like, we're calling it this. And or Vahid was very sharp when he did the cover of the film book, and like spatial cinematic betwixt. Like, it's a mouthful, right? It doesn't necessarily fall off the tongue of metadata, but that's actually what we wanted it to be called. But even though it's a subtitle, you look at the cover and it looks like it's the title. So yeah, all those things kind of play a role in why a book, and maybe why more books, hopefully. Maybe not too many, but
There can never be too many. Well, thank you all, and I appreciate your thoughtful answers to that. I mean, I agree, like there's still value to it. It's still a platform that doesn't really have an equal, and there is still that sense of longevity. I mean, it persists longer than some of these digital projects that don't. And as we all realized through the discussion today, like you said, Chris, it's definitely still a challenge. It's a challenge to make it happen. So congratulations on all your publications. And thank you for being part of the panel today. Thanks to all of our attendees, and to Brad for helping out with the behind the scenes. You're more than welcome. I'm sorry we didn't have time for the Q&A, but you're more than welcome to get in touch with any of our participants today if you have more questions. And that's it. It's a wrap.
thank you, Amy and Brad.
Yeah, thanks for organizing this, guys.
Thank
Oh,
Thanks,
yes.
Sean and Chris.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to note that in the chat, Vahid, James's
Oh, yes.
co-author, provided a direct link to the download for a perfect purple architecture.
Yes, thank you for doing that. I was just about, I'm like, oh, maybe I should drop that in the chat, and there it was. So I appreciate that.
Feel free for anybody here to purchase my book too. We do get some royalties for that
Or-
eventually.
Sean wants his nickel.
Yeah, I know. I
Ah.
might get a check for $4 next month or something. Yeah.
Or you could check it out in the library. So
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
I'll do that because you were. Yeah.
you're
And thank
more
you,
than
Amy.
welcome to borrow our copy.
Thank you for getting the copies and putting them in the library. It's much appreciated.
Oh, absolutely. And if you publish another one, let me know and we'll get that too.
Animated architecture. I'll be sending you an email.
I made a
Sure.
note. I made a note that I need to look into that one.
Thank you again.
All right. Thanks,
Thanks.
everybody.